very happy to have Katja Aegerter today here with me, talking about what she does as a location-independent psychologist and mental health professional specialized in family global mobility. You support mobile families like yours as you live the globally mobile lifestyle yourself, and you are raising your children in between worlds as well. So can you please share a bit about yourself, where you come from and what made you do what you do today? I know that the question where you come from is always like a trigger for everyone who lives globally. You said, okay, do you have time? I do. So please.
Okay. Yeah, that would have been my first question. How much time do we have? No, but maybe it's quite a surprise for everybody, but I am not a third culture kid myself, I have to admit. I come from the Saarland, which is the region in the west of Germany, and it's very rural. Everybody is very sedentary there. I'm one of those black sheep that have left the region, actually, and but I never felt rooted. I never felt like I belong, and I also never really felt connected to my classmates I had a lot of friends, but even to the day, I don't have a lot of contact because we were so different from our mindset. I really always just aspired to get out, even though it's a nice place. And I love going back. I love seeing my family. I love seeing those few friends that I still have from there. My aim was always to get out of there. And so currently I live in Skopje in North Macedonia, in the Balkans, Eastern Europe. And yes, I have left the region of Saarland when I was 22. I left for the first time, and I did breathe the world air, and I never wanted to go back. So I had this glimpse of the world and I needed to see more. Already before I left the Saarland, I traveled a lot and I saw a lot. I always wanted to get out. And then when I was 22, I did an Erasmus exchange, which is this university exchange between European countries. And I went to Barcelona, which is, I guess, the most fantastic place to do an Erasmus as a young student. And there I met my husband, who is Swiss. So, and luckily, he has the same mindset. I mean, he also comes from a small village in Switzerland. He never felt rooted there. He never felt like he belonged. So we really were surfing on the same wave when it comes to our objective for life and for lifestyle. And yes, since I lived in Barcelona, I went back to university in Germany and finished my degree. My boyfriend at the time, went back to Switzerland to finish his degree. So it was years of a lot of train rides going back and forth between Switzerland and Germany, and lots of travels to places to explore the world in between. And then when I was 27, I finally packed all my bags as soon as I had my last exam done, and took the car. I don't remember, even maybe my dad drove me down with all my stuff to Bern, which was kind of my first home abroad, first real home. And ever since 27, I have lived in 8 countries on 3 continents, and I love it. I mean, this is the life I want to live. This is perfect. Every 3 years, every 2, 3, at the most 4 years, I get restless. And I hear that a lot from third culture kids as well, that after a few years they get restless. So I get restless too. And in the first part of my life, how I managed was that I always moved furniture around my room. I always redesigned my room every 3 months because I got so bored with it. And I do believe, I have thought about this a lot in the past few months, that really 2 main elements have impacted me so that I was so eager to move around the world. And one of those is that my father had this nomadic gene. If there is such thing, I don't know. And he inherited that to me, definitely. he became sedentary due to marriage, because my mother never wanted to leave her birthplace, and she still lives there actually, which is beautiful as well. But he always took any opportunity to travel. He already, before he got married, he lived around a little bit in Switzerland, in other parts of Germany, in France. So I think I inherited that from him, and he was really happy about me inheriting it, because afterwards he always was able to visit us, and he had an excuse to go travel and leave my mom at home. So he always came by himself everywhere. And the other element I became aware just recently, one part of my family, my mom's sister, they are a military family. My aunt is married to a Mexican American who was in the army, and they would live in between the US and Germany for years. And we always visited them because they were always in this region of Frankfurt am Main, where all the Americans are. And this is where I got, as really a small child already, I got this exposure of this lifestyle, of this moving back and forth, of raising children with different languages. I hopped on a plane, and I'm still amazed that my parents allowed me. I hopped on a plane to the deep south of Arizona by myself, and I spent the summer with my family there, and I loved that as well. And so I'm really grateful for my parents that they allowed me to fly to Arizona when I was 17. It was an adventure. Yes, and I think those two factors actually impacted me and my wish for this lifestyle. And I'm really glad that my husband is the same way, has the same mindset. So yeah, we live on with this life, and we raise our two children in this lifestyle. Yeah.
That's pretty amazing, and it's very interesting to see how someone who grew up in one place can become actually a third culture adult. Even the nomadic gene, I like this expression, that is, I think, somehow rooted in every one of us. If we look back at history, we were not that much sedentary at the beginning. So I might say it's actually a basic need that we might have, only that some feel more comfortable. Like you mentioned, your mom, who prefers staying in one place, which is perfectly normal as well. So it's the combination. And you mentioned this fact that your husband has the same gene, which makes it, I think, a little bit easier also when you determine or when you decide when to move and if you move again. And especially if you move every 3-4 years, like you mentioned, it's so important that both parents, at least the parents, are on the same page, and then also the children, which leads me to the next question that I have. Because you have a certain approach in your practice, and what age groups would you be mostly interested in on serving? I know that it's not necessarily the very young children, but rather the older third culture kids or cross culture kids, or however we want to name them. Yes, children who grew up among worlds. Would you like to share a bit more about this?
Yes. So at the moment in my practice, the focus of what I'm doing is actually on the parents, mostly at the moment, because I think that it's really important to raise the awareness of transferable families, and especially parents, to the challenges that can be there. And so I'm holding presentations at different international either organizations or some international clubs. I did all the presentation for the International Women's Club and all these people, all these communities where a lot of expats and a lot of globally mobile parents or people gather. Then I act as an advisor for our Swiss ministry, for their family office. Whenever they have a question regarding third culture kids, they turn to me, and I hold workshops there to prepare the parents, always in May, for the next transition, because that's usually coming up in the summer. I did hold presentations at schools, everything pre-corona, of course. At the moment, there is not so many presentations going on, but I did raise awareness among teachers, really everybody who is somehow dealing with third culture kids and who I think can benefit from the background knowledge of what is this mobility doing to the children, and how do they react to it? So that is my main focus at the moment. And in March, actually, I signed up for an additional training in acceptance and commitment therapy, because along the way, I have been trying to find a therapy approach that works for adult third culture kids to process their past, to reflect on their past, and to really be able to see all those benefits that they have without having to suffer from those elements that might have impacted them in a negative way from their past. So I've done training in solution-focused therapy, which then I realized I don't like it, that it is too only focused on solution and on looking forward, because the ATCKs, the adult third culture kids, really also need to look back just a little bit, just to see and to understand why they feel the way they feel. So I wasn't happy with that approach for the specific client group that I want to work with. I mean, I love the approach for other people, but for this client group. So I'm really hoping that acceptance and commitment therapy that I'm doing the training in March will help me. And I mean, in the long run, I'd love to develop my own therapy approach, but that's another story. So in the future, I'd really love to work more with adult third culture kids as well, to help them see the positive things that they gained from this experience, while also working on those negative aspects that they are impacted by in their adult life.
Yes, I pretty much like your approach. That is very positive, and this was actually also how I found you on Instagram, where you have an account that we're sharing. But I find it very important for those families who are in global transition, who are very mobile, but also for those who maybe stay a little bit longer, like my family. We ended up staying longer than we expected in one place. But nevertheless, our children grew up outside of their parents' passport country or countries, or where we grew up. I grew up abroad as well. So I don't have really a connection to my parents' passport country. So the way to then transmit our culture and our heritage culture and language, etc., becomes, in my opinion, even a little bit more complicated than for someone who had this experience. But having a look at this whole life and journey with the positive eye, with the smiling eye, and not the one, oh my gosh, there will be problems and you will encounter this and that, makes it somehow easier. This doesn't mean that you won't encounter difficult times. It is an ups and downs journey, but life in general is. So I pretty much like your very positivistic approach on all of this, because I must confess, the first time I got confronted with also studies about third culture kids, I saw very much people pointing out the negatives. Be aware of, take care of, don't do, avoid, etc. With this regards, I mean, we all know the Third Culture Kids Bible, so to say, how it is called, the book by Pollock and David Pollock and Ruth van Reken, now the third edition, where they talk also about building a raft. Is there anything that you take from this book or from these approaches also in your practice? Do you also work with a raft? Or what is your approach? What is your method, so to say?
Yes. So the raft, I do work with it. I explain it to parents, because I also, as the authors of the book, actually, I believe that you can only really start new in a place when you did say a goodbye in the old place. Because otherwise you will always have stuff in your backpack that is not going to let go if you don't process it before. And so the raft is really only describing this farewell process, right? The R for reconciliation, A for affirmation, the F for really celebrating the farewell, and then the T for think destination. And as I said, I do teach that to my parents in my courses, because I think it's very important. What I really deem extremely important, and that's what I'm I fear that I'm praising it even to the parents in my courses, is the front loading. And by front loading, I mean really lots of transparency from the start even of an application process, and throughout the whole process. Just be transparent, no matter how old your children are. There's really age-appropriate ways to communicate with your children about an upcoming move. And so I always encourage the parents, because, for example, in our ministry and in a lot of other ministries, the entire process already starts a year ahead. I know that there is other businesses or other areas where people really have to move from almost one day to the other. But if you can, and if you are in such a system where you are really aware of the move such a long time before, why keep it a secret from your children? I mean, I think they are entitled to know and entitled to take part, because in the end, they have to move along. So I always encourage the parents, even as soon as you get the list with all the postings that you can apply to, sit down at the table and talk about it, and even take in the kids' ideas of maybe wanting to move to, I don't know, Peru, even if it's no option for you whatsoever, but just take it in and don't negate it right from the beginning. Just say, oh yeah, that would be a nice posting. Let's think about it and talk about it again. And there is more factors that we have to look at. And I think if you involve children, they feel taken much more seriously. And if they feel like they have a voice or a contribution, they are also much more willing to do compromises. So even if in the end you apply to some postings that might not be their dream postings, if they feel that they have been involved in this decision process, they will be much more willing to come along without any tantrum or any drama. So that is really something that I deem extremely important: transparency towards the children, no matter what age. And there is but there is children's books and workbooks and fantastic material that you can use to help children, also smaller children. And obviously with bigger children, the transparency and the mutual understanding is even more important, I would say. One other factor that I really think is important is some kind of continuity. And that also came out from the research that I did. I'm going to be talking about it probably a little later, that children really appreciated it if, for example, continuity in the form of school systems. I had one adult third culture kid that I talked to, and she told me that she would always go to German school. And so whenever they moved posting, at least the school element was a given for her. It was, she knew she would go there. She knew how it worked. It would work like that in every country in a German school. So she knew all the processes already in school. So it didn't drop her out of her shoes. How do you say that the location change? At least she knew this big part of her life, which is the school, will be more or less the same. Maybe some other people, but the system works the same. The exams work the same. Also, one other factor of continuity that some adult third culture kids have talked to me about is a home base. And I know even we don't have a home base, because sometimes it is either logistically or financially it is not possible. But some of the ATCKs I talked to have really emphasized that due to having a home base, they really felt connected to their parents' passport country. And depending on how important that is for you, and I mean, for some parents, this might not be really important that the kids have a connection to their home countries, but for some parents it is. So that would be a consideration to have a home base, to give the children some continuity in that as well. And also in bringing along their staff, in keeping on with traditions that you keep over all the moves. Some kind of continuity is really important. And I talked about giving children a voice and this feeling of contribution. I think this is the most important aspect from what I could see from the adult third culture kids that I've talked to, but also the children and the parents that I've talked to. they always tell me that as soon as they give their children some kind of a voice in the process, they are very surprised to see that the kids, they are even passionate about it, and they come along and they are excited about it. So that's what I would say. That's what I mean by front loading, and by keeping them informed, keeping them in the loop, and giving them some contribution. Yeah.
This is amazing. Well, you were talking about this front loading and making the children participants and actually actively involved in the decision-making process. This reminds me of the field where I also work in with multilingual families when it comes to languages, also to involve the children. It's called child's agency or children's agency. Mm-hmm. So their involvement in the decision-making process with regards to the languages that they want to speak. So I think there is a very close analogy between a child that grows up with multiple cultures and with multiple languages automatically. When they have a say, when they can decide which culture, which dish they like, or which what sports they like in that new place, but also which language they like to speak. As you are also working with multilingual families or multicultural families, I can suppose that the question about the language is also something that you have to deal with. But before we get there, I would like you to tell a bit more about your research. You just mentioned it, where you focused on, and what is your main focus, yes, and what do you like to emphasize?
Mm-hmm. Well, I did some research for the thesis I did for my Master of Science in Psychology that I completed only 3 years ago, because I did it in my second educational life. And for that thesis, I was really interested in the elements that actually can give those mobile children stability throughout their mobile childhood. And I focused on the family for my research, because otherwise it would have gotten out of hand, I guess. I'm so interested in this whole topic that I really... I would have probably covered it all, or wanted to cover it all. And so I only covered family relationships and anything that would go into that topic. And I love doing it. I did qualitative research, which means that I did interviews with 7 adult third culture kids from the age of 20 to the age of, I think the oldest was 56. They came from all different kinds of backgrounds, private businesses, the career of the parents due to a private career and private business, or diplomatic service. So it was covering a range of different age groups and a range of different career paths. And it was so, I'm so passionate about this topic, and it was so satisfying to me that these people shared their story with me. I was so grateful to listen to their life stories, and also to see who may suffer still a little bit from their childhood, and try to pinpoint the connection between maybe what the parents did or did not do, and so to improve also the content of my courses. And in the end, the findings that I made were, I think they were important for me and for the entire research in this area. And they really displayed how important the family relationships are. And I must emphasize that the family relationships for the third culture kids are really critically important up until early teenage years. So I believe, and even after that, if you manage to really build a solid foundation up until then. And that was also the result of my research, that family relationships really were able to give those children the necessary stability that they don't have, and that needs to be maintained and created for a mobile child really actively, because it's not just there like for other children who live in the same place. It really needs to be generated by the parents. And so I found out that, for example, the working parent played a significant role, because both parents kind of complement each other with the elements that they cover in a child's life. So just a random example is that I am, for example, more responsible for the caring part. I'm the emotional support, I'm the logistical support, and my husband covers totally different things. He's more the entertainer, and he is more able to just sit down for hours and play. And so we cover different things, and it became really apparent in my research that both are important. Both parents are important for creating this stability for children. And I looked at sibling relationships also a little bit in my research. And there were two findings, basically, that some of the ATCKs had really close sibling relationships up until the day now in grown-up life. And the others, it usually depended on how big the age gap was between the children. If the age gap was really big, usually one of the older children would leave the family early on, the moving family, and that kind of also distanced the relationship a little bit. So that was interesting too. And as I said earlier, the family relationships are really important up until early teenage years, because then there's going to be a shift from family relationships to peers. And that is probably also why early teenagers don't really want to move anymore, because now they have their friendship, they have their clique, and they enjoy being with their friends more than they are at home. So I think at that age it becomes difficult to convince a child, an early teenager, to move somewhere else. And yes, I talked a little bit about the predictability that can be created through transparency and continuity. That was one main finding also from my research. And another important factor was also actually the attitude of the parents. And really, if the parents were both positive, or even just the main caregiver for the children, because usually one of the parents is going to work every day, if the main caregiver of the parents was really of the children was really positive about the moving and really excited to get to know the new country, and really this attitude transmitted onto the children. And so that was really interesting as well. And that was only this one research that I did. And I'm really interested in doing more research, because I am eager to understand what this impact does to the adults. And I'm really interested in the mental health of adult third culture kids, and which detailed aspects impact it. So I'd love to do more research on that, and I'm currently working on finding a way how to do that while doing my courses and while supporting the families on the way.
Yes, absolutely. And I find this perspective, once not necessarily focused on the children, but on the adults. What comes out of this? What is the consequence of such a childhood? What can be the consequence of that childhood? There are enough people that we can interview and ask about this. And there are some books also published about it. But I think there is a need to also find out certain mechanisms. Like you said yourself, there is a difference between those who maybe left the family earlier. There is a difference also among siblings. I can imagine that also siblings have different reactions to these moves. There are those who have then the urge of staying in one place, finally, after having moved so many times, and others who just don't want to stop, or that are even afraid to stop. I had some families where one parent was an adult third culture kid, and who had really I would say, issues of staying in one place longer than 4 or 5 years. And you mentioned that you like to move furniture, yes, before moving. And I see this in myself. I'm now here almost 16 years in one place, which is very unusual or not something that I really like. I like to move more often. And so I see this itch every 3 years to change something major, whether it is, yes, furniture, you mentioned furniture, but it can be also other things in our business, with our family, with anything.
Yeah.
So I think there is something that is interesting to really research a little bit deeper, but it truly is also interesting to see how these parents, who then are adult third culture kids, how they raise their children. And if they move, if they don't move, why they don't move, or why they do move more often. Or you mentioned the choice of the school.
Mhm.
You mentioned this person, your client, who went always to the same German school,
System.
which is not necessarily a given for all the languages. I mean, with German, maybe yes, with French, with English, absolutely. But what about all the other languages? Right. And then we have this problem of deciding which language to pass on, which language actually becomes then more dominant. Is it then only the language or also the culture? And these kind of issues that we have then in the core family, that are actually something that many families who raise their children in one country maybe never face, but that you face on a regular basis in a mobile family. I think that is a very interesting aspect of it all. Are there a few tips that you would give to parents when embarking on an international journey? You mentioned already that you also talk about the raft and your approach. What are maybe 5 aspects to consider before embarking?
Yeah. So I do want to say that I would definitely encourage everybody who wants to do it or who considers raising their children internationally, because I do really believe that with the awareness, what can be a challenge and what can be a stone in the way, if you are aware of it and if you know how to deal with it, even already the awareness, I think, will help you to make this a wonderful and beneficial experience for the whole family. So I would definitely tell every parent who comes to me to ask me, oh, should I do it or not? We're scared that we are destroying our children's mental health or whatever. I always say, do it, but do it well and do it prepared. Don't leave without doing your homework on what can be. And so I talked earlier, I talked about the parents' attitude, which I think is a really important component. At the same time, it's difficult, right? If you are in a foreign country and you as the caregiver of your children suffer, or you don't like it, or I also don't believe that you should hide it from your children. I really also think that there you should be transparent in a way that the children understand, because children get it all. They feel it if their mom or their dad is not feeling well, or if they're not happy. They have a sensor for that. So I do believe that the attitude is really important, but not lying or not kind of putting a different face on when they are around, because they will feel. So, but then to sit down with them and just discuss how you feel and why you feel that way. And going along with that is that I think is really important that the caregiver gives enough room to themselves for self-care. I'm a really big defender for any parent, not only for mobile parents, that they try to build in a little space in everyday's life to take care of yourself. And it took me a long time to realize that. Many years of parenthood already, to realize that only if I take care of myself, I can really and positively take care of my children. And so I think that's really something very important. And another aspect is presence. Just, I know that there is couples where both have a tremendous career and where both really love to go to work. And however, I do believe that at least in the first few months, throughout the transition, it's really important to be there for the children. And I don't say just leave your career or quit your job. I just say that when you get home, when you are with your children, be there, be present for them, because in the first few months they might have a hard time with the transition. They might not. Maybe they are really excited to be where they are, but they might have difficulties with the transition. And be prepared that the first few months can be a little more intense, that they hang on your skirt the whole time because they just need this attachment. And I talked about the transparency before, so that is one tip, really transparent. I cannot stress it more often. Give your children a voice, a contribution. Try to just find the little decisions that they can make by themselves. Let them pack their own moving box. Let them draw on their moving box. Let them pack their little backpack for the trip. Just these tiny little things where they have contributed to the whole process. And allow their feelings. I always talk about the grief process in Third Culture Kids. That is really important, and it is important to process the grief, because otherwise they will store it in their backpack and it will emerge at some point in their life. And for most Third Culture Kids, it emerges in adulthood. And so really give room for that. Don't cheer them up. Don't try to tell them how wonderful it will be, how many friends they're going to make. Allow for them to be sad, and even show them that you're sad too, leaving a posting. I think that is really, really important. If you know about these things, do it. Go out there. If it's really, if you stay in a place because of your children, because you think your children need to be rooted, they need to be settled, they need to have the opportunity to grow roots in a certain country, at the same time you are totally unhappy and you're getting depressed, this is not the parent that they want or that they need. So rather do what you are passionate about, and do it in a child-friendly way, and be aware of what can happen or what can be a challenge.
Are German from origin,
Yes.
but you're currently living in Macedonia.
Yes.
And my passion for languages, but actually also for cultures. I mean, it's all language comes with a culture comes with a language. So my question now for you is, how do you manage to maintain your language or languages? Your husband is Swiss German. So you have probably Swiss German and German, or maybe German in your family. And how do you manage also to add new ones? You just moved not so long ago to Macedonia. And especially now, also maybe considering the situation that we have at the moment in 2021, we're here in the Netherlands, we're in the second lockdown. Other places, it's the same situation. So I think there is even more need of finding ways to socialize with others, but it's not that possible. And especially when it comes to making new friends, like you said before, which is important. If this is not a given, if it's not an option, how do you manage that, or would you help other families manage this situation with the different languages or with the different cultures?
Well, first, for us, we are a little chaotic, I would say, when it comes to languages, I have to admit. I started out speaking in standard German with my daughter when she was born, and we were living in Washington, D.C. at the time. So I spoke standard German. My husband spoke Swiss German. She started learning first Spanish because she went to a daycare where the caregivers were all from Latin America. So her first word coming home from daycare was agua when she was thirsty. She switched daycares already after a few months because she went to the daycare of my employer then, and I increased my work volume, so we switched her to make it logistically more easier. And so there it was English. So she started learning English, and when my daughter she had just turned 2, we moved back to Switzerland. So I spoke to her in standard German until she was 2. and she had just started to speak English from the daycare. And in Switzerland, since I felt totally uncomfortable talking to her in standard German in Switzerland, because in Switzerland, Germans sometimes are not so popular, I really felt very uncomfortable speaking to her in standard German. I switched to English, actually, even though I know it's not my native language. However, I studied English. I learned it early on with my family because my cousins, they don't speak any German, so I had to learn English quite early. And I lived in English-speaking countries for about 6 years altogether. So I thought, okay, my level of English is okay enough. I hesitated in the beginning because I said earlier that my first degree was actually in languages. So I knew that you shouldn't speak to your children in anything other than your native language. Maybe that has changed in the meantime, I don't know. But I switched to English. So I spoke to her in English, and then my son was born after a few months. So he picked up the English anyway, because then I just, in everyday life, I spoke to the two of them in English. And our family language actually has and still is Swiss German. So when we sit together at the table, we all speak Swiss German. And in the countries where we lived, since my husband worked in international development, we are always being posted to fantastically adventurous countries like Kyrgyzstan, where we were before, or now North Macedonia. And the kids usually go to English-speaking schools. So they do have lessons in local languages as well. In Kyrgyzstan, they learned Russian and Kyrgyz. And here, they don't learn Macedonian up until now, I have to say. But in Kyrgyzstan, they learned a little bit of Russian and a little bit of Kyrgyz in school, while our language at home, for me, is still English or Swiss German, sometimes standard German. And my husband only speaks Swiss German, and among themselves, they only speak English usually. Their language together is English. And yes, for the language learning part, I find it very difficult also in those countries where we are posted. A lot of our life really just happens within these expat circles. Yeah. So there is not a lot of exposure to the local language, apart from market language that I used in the markets, in the supermarkets, or whenever I had to make a phone call, I tried to learn and speak Russian in Kyrgyzstan before. But I have to say that our exposure to the local languages is so minimal that usually it never goes beyond speaking a few words that are really important. And here in Macedonia, with lockdown and, as you say, with limited social life and with limited possibility also to meet a teacher, because I'm not comfortable at the moment to sit together with somebody at a table and learn a language. I haven't even started yet to deal with it, to start learning the language. And yes, that was quite chaotic for us. And I guess that this is the same for many other families. And I cannot speak much for families that are in countries where the language might be easier to learn, how it will work then. But I really fear that for many families, life happens in expat circles and in the expat community, and their English is the most used language, I would say.
In the majority of the cases, it's English. Also because you can find English-speaking schools or international schools all over the world, no matter where you end up, if it's Singapore or somewhere in Macedonia, right?
Yes, yes. But, even in Kyrgyzstan, there was usually in our postings, you cannot find German schools or French schools, which would be good for us too, but there is always an English-speaking school. So that is, and for me, I must say that it's not an option. It has never been an option to send the kids to a local school just to encourage learning the language, because I'm a little too scared of the local traditions on how, like the didactic approach and the pedagogic approach of the schools in Kyrgyzstan. I would not have wanted for my children to go to a local school there, because I have a certain opinion about the way of treating students and of teaching things. And I'm very happy usually with the approach in the international schools. So it would have not been an option for us to send them to a local school to learn the language, especially also since after 4 years, I am not going to be able to maintain it. I think that is the biggest problem that many families have, right? If they send children to local schools, or if they encourage them to learn the local language, in the end, I'm not so sure who's going to speak to them in that language to maintain it, because if they don't use it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that is one of the main issues or problems that international families face. How can I give this continuity that you mentioned before also throughout their educational part of their childhood, which is very important, that they can find this continuity in their daily life that they have outside of the family. You have this continuity with the language that for you now is English and Swiss German. And outside of the home, they have like the second leg that makes them a little bit more stable, if that second leg is something that they can recognize through language, through the curriculum that is similar or the same as they were used before. I completely understand also the reluctancy, or even, yes, the refusal of learning a local language. I'm a defender of learning all kind of languages, but if you stay only for a short amount of time, and your children need to find a way, and yourself need to find a way to function in that place. There are places where you're perfectly fine with English, others where it's better that you know French, other Spanish and other languages. Of course, knowing the local language is a plus, but we also have to be quite realistic how much time it takes to become fluent, and how much time it takes to really be able to have a normal conversation. I'm not talking about holding a speech or writing a long article. I really am on the basics of understanding and being able to utter words and to say things with the right intonation in the right moment and understand what the other is saying. It takes time. And if you move more often or regularly, every 3-4 years, takes a year to get used to it, to dive into it, to understand how everything works. Then you have maybe 1 year to really dive into it, and then the next year you already are with your mind in the next country, because you know you're going to move. So it's much more realistic to focus on what languages are important for us. And here I must say that's great that you chose a language to speak with your daughter that was actually an important language for her. Maybe also the German was, but you saw that her English is the one that she cherishes and that she needs. And so you responded to her needs, and you can help her with that. And this is something that is also a process in the life that internationals have when they are in different places. So to find out also what maybe worked in one place might not work in the next one. So are we okay of switching the family language? Are you okay that mom now is speaking English with you? And we don't have to be native speakers. I mean, it doesn't need to be our L1, chronologically speaking, that we speak with our children. I wrote about this as well, but it's more important that we have this bond, that we can create this connection through this language with our children. Then it depends on the others. But what I find also very interesting, and I know it's going to go a bit longer than planned, but that you maintain Swiss German, which is not a written language, right? It's not something where you find a lot of literature about that you can read. I mean, we had some books, or we listened to music. We also have Swiss German as one of our languages, but to transmit or to maintain an oral language throughout the years is something that as families like ours are very proud of, right? But this is because we consider Swiss German as an important language, a prestigious language. There are others who maybe have also a dialect or a local language that is not written, or it's not one of the standard languages in their country of origin, that they do not want or cannot maintain for other reasons. So I pretty much applaud you that you can maintain it. Yes.
Well, Swiss German for us really is an important integral language, I would say. It is the main language that we use, and we have a lot of family and friends in Switzerland, and they also realize that they need Swiss German to be able to communicate with people back in our home or in my husband's home country, because we have a lot of friends with children that we see there every time we go home. And they realize that they need this language, otherwise they wouldn't be able to play with them. So I think that's interesting. And I had the objective, actually, I have to say that, to learn the language of every country that we moved to. And even before we started moving around so much, every trip, I mean, I have little language guides for Greek, for Turkish, for every country we traveled to. I tried to learn at least yes, no, how are you, hello, and the numbers. And I did that before having had children. And then we moved to Kyrgyzstan, and there was Russian. And Russian was just, it knocked me out because I moved to Spain, and after 6 months, I was fluently speaking Spanish. And in France, the same. And in Swiss German, it was quite easy for me as well, because I come from Germany and I listened to my husband speaking, and so I just picked it up. And then I get to Kyrgyzstan and the language is Russian, and I'm a person who needs to understand the grammar. And in Russian, this is a thing of impossibility to understand the grammar and then really do it in the right way, because every word changes depending on whether it's feminine or masculine or which case it is. And so I realized after a year of language classes in Russian, I could not have a normal, really simple conversation. And this frustrated me to the point that I just focused on other things. And I'm sad now, because I do understand a little bit of Russian. I can read Russian and I can talk very rudimentarily to somebody, but I wish I had given more effort. But life gets into the way often,
Yes,
I have to
yes.
say.
Yes, but you never know. Maybe you will move to a Russian-speaking country very soon. Again, we never know. Sometimes it comes back and you get the second chance. Or
And Macedonian is not so different.
Yes.
Macedonian, they also write Cyrillic, so at least I have the advantage already that I'm able to read the street signs and the newspapers here. And it is quite, I hope nobody kills me now, but it is quite similar to Russian, and so I can understand some words in Macedonian thanks to the Russian that I learned earlier.
Yeah, it's absolutely. It's also that what I find fascinating with languages, that you can, with what you have already in your backpack, that you can use it also for the next languages, and then also cultures to come, because it has also to do with the culture. Thank you very much, Katja. It was a real pleasure talking with you, and I could go on and on.
Me too.
I could find more and more things to say about culture, about language, about how to help mobile families. Would you like to share maybe what your next projects are or plans are, or where we can find you?
Yes, I have a website. I'm on Instagram. My name everywhere is Mobile Family Support. I think you will share the addresses also. Mobile families, on reorganizing all the trainings that I have already designed into a modular structure. So I'm taking them apart and putting them back together in different modules to cover different topics, and kind of organizing it from before departure, during a posting, and repatriation, to give it a little bit of a structure. And also, I'd love to work on creating some peer support groups, because I really believe that common experiences, if you share them, it is already one step closer to normalizing it. And so I'd love to hold peer support groups, be it for parents of TCKs, so they can talk about their experiences, or be it for Adult Third Culture Kids. And yes, and that's mainly what I'm working on. And as I said, I'm extremely interested in research, so I'm really looking into how can I proceed with this also, and how can I do more research? How can I involve myself either in ongoing projects or in new projects? I'd love to do more on that front. And yes, on the side, I actually wrote a children's book. That was a little passion of mine because I like writing. And so I wrote a children's book on farewell and grief of TCKs. The whole story is about a child who has to leave a posting, and it is currently being illustrated. So it might take a moment. Yes, the illustrator is working on it right now. So the text is done. I have no idea how it works with publishing in the end, but that is one little passion of mine as well, that I do believe that there is not a lot of literature particularly focusing on this group of children. And so I decided to write my own book.
Okay. That's amazing. Yes, do you have a title for the book that you can share?
Not yet. No. It's just it really just is. I wrote the text and it is in rhyme form because I love to rhyme, and I haven't really thought about. I have thought about the title, but I haven't decided anything yet. I want to see the illustrations also first before I do that.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm happy.
Thank you.
When it's ready.
Yes.
Thank you for your time, for sharing all this with us, and success with everything that you're doing, like we say in Dutch.
Thank you.